A lot about food sensitivities. This is a topic that is so confusing to people. And so, sometimes when I get to do the show by myself, which is super fun, I get to talk about what I want to talk about. But I want to talk about this too because I have people coming to me on a regular basis who the first thing that they want to do when they realize, they come to me because I'm a functional nutritionist, I run labs, whatever. But the first thing they want to do is, I want to do a food sensitivity test. And does it always make sense? Sometimes yeah, sometimes no. So I wanted to dig in a little bit and just give some insight as to food sensitivities. Oh, let me just turn my music down. Some insight as to, with food sensitivities, what to look for, and what makes sense, what's true, what's not so true, and what you can look out for yourself, because that's what really matters is you're different than everybody else. So of course, as always, we start this show with gratitude. I do believe gratitude can change the world. Even if we're in a funk, there's always stuff to be grateful for. So I think that right now I'm grateful to have another birthday. It's not today, it's next week. But every birthday means that I'm still here and still kicking, and that I still have the ability to get out and do the things that I was put here to do, and so that's what I'm grateful for today. So I'll probably be grateful for that next week too. Anyway, so all right, let's jump into food sensitivities. I think that the first thing that we want to really hit on is that people tend to confuse sensitivities with allergies, and that is they're very separate parts of the immune system. And so when we have a true allergy to food, what that means is we have it's a quick reaction, it's a quick presentation of whatever symptoms you get for allergies, whether it's anaphylaxis, whether, whatever the case may be. These are true allergies. If you have allergies to pollen, right, you have that stuffy nose feeling or the watery eyes. These things happen pretty quickly. Whereas food sensitivity is a different part of the immune system. They tend to present with symptoms anywhere from 2 to 9 days after ingestion of that food. So it can be really confusing when you are trying to do, we talk about elimination diets a lot in health and nutrition, and they're really useful. I think that they can be great, but it can be difficult when whether you're eliminating foods or just trying to understand what's going on with your body. If you're having some sensitivities and you can't figure out what it is, if it was something that you ate 9 days ago, then it's gonna be hard to know what that was. So even if you're journaling, you're doing your food journal, and you're doing all the things that you're supposed to do. These are the things that I like to see. They can be hard to do regularly, but they can give us a lot of really good insight. But you're doing all the right things, but it's still hard to determine what it is you're reacting to because it happened 9 days ago. So for me personally, I'll tell you my story. Probably tell you a couple of my stories, but when I started so I was, 40s, whatever it was, and having these, a lot of you have probably heard this story before, but I was having these really intense breakouts. And so I'd had these breakouts for most of my life, but they started changing. And so I would get back, behind my ears, behind my jaw, it was almost like rashes, but they were little pimples. And then along my jawline, I would get these cystic pimples that's all they were. They wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't turn into a whitehead, nothing. They just sat there and they hurt and they hurt and they hurt. And I would get them, they started getting all over my face, and I was like, what is happening? And why is this happening? And so I did all of the things, right? I changed the way that I washed my face. I changed all the different things that I put on my face for pimples, and nothing was working. So finally, I was a couple of years into being a nutritionist, and I thought, well, maybe it's time I start giving up gluten and see what happens. And so that's what I did, and almost immediately the pimples went away. So I tested it. I was, off gluten for several months, and then decided, well, I'm going to have a couple of beers because I'm in Colorado and we have lots of great microbrews around here. So we went out with friends. I had a couple of beers and I had some pasta for dinner. And it was 8 days later that my face broke out again. So fascinating stuff. And so even to this day, I know that it's 8 days and I start looking for breakouts. Now this was a lot of years ago. This is probably, I don't know, 8 years ago, give or take, that I did this. And there's an interesting part of this story too, that when we work through the sensitivities, so I was off it really hardcore for a lot of years. I didn't touch it. If I touched it, I knew I was going to break out, and I did. What happens though, interestingly, with the immune system is it has a memory, but it's these immune cells that have this memory. Once you move through all of those immune cells and they're not pissed off anymore, then essentially there's the possibility that the body starts to forget about this sensitivity. And that's what we want, right? We don't want to have to avoid all of these foods for our entire lives. We want to start to decrease symptoms and eliminate symptoms and allow the immune system to calm. So then if you do eat some of these foods again, then it's not as intense as it used to be, or maybe it doesn't happen at all like it used to. So with me personally, what I find now is I'm still very, very careful. But what I find now is if I have a little bit of gluten, I don't break out. But here's the thing too. I know my genetics. My genetics predispose me to autoimmune disease as well as to celiac disease. And so the last thing that I want to do is push either of those things. So celiac is obviously autoimmune, so I don't want to push that, nor do I want to push any kind of thyroid condition, which is what my mom had, and a lot of women do. So my intent in telling you all of this is we don't want to have to be super careful all of the time, but knowing who we are genetically, epigenetically, knowing what our sensitivities are, knowing that we have the ability to decrease the immune response, but also having the awareness around what our potential is, these are all things that really can help us to optimize, to make the right decisions based on our health, based on our needs, based on what we want out of life. What I know I don't want is an autoimmune condition, so I'm going to do everything that I can to decrease any possibility that's going to trigger, because of my my genetic variants, that could trigger an autoimmune condition. So what are the things that can trigger an autoimmune condition? A little maybe off topic, but sure, it's going to be things like gluten, other types of foods potentially, inflammatory foods that are unhealthy fats, unhealthy meat, unhealthy fast food, the preservatives, the pesticides, the herbicides, all of these things can trigger immune responses, triggering autoimmune conditions. So I want to avoid those as much as I can. And so it makes things a little easier that I don't have to be as careful, but I'm still very, very careful. I think it's really important. So there are a couple of things, there are some myths around food sensitivities that I think are important to cover. One of those being that sensitivities are only in your head. So this is a real problem because sensitivities aren't just showing up as GI issues, right? For me, they showed up as, pimples on my face. They can show up as brain fog. They can show up as joint pain. They can show up as anxiety, depression, frustration, you name it. If there's an immune response, if there's this underlying inflammatory response that's going on, which is what food sensitivities are going to create, then it can present as a multitude of symptoms. So it can be one, it can be multiple. Something that I think about for myself is, when I had pimples on my face, I'm wondering, what's it doing to the rest of my body? What's it doing to what I can't see? What kind of inflammatory response is going on that maybe I don't know about? And so, there's a little bit of a blessing in the fact that it showed up on my face, because I could see it and I wanted to do something about it, but it helped me. I also think, okay, what else is it doing, and is it pushing? Could it have been pushing autoimmunity? Of course it could. So these are things to really take into consideration, and knowing that your symptoms could be food sensitivities. I think another thing that I really think is important to hit on, though, is understanding that in a lot of cases, that we aren't just sensitive to food just because. There's usually a reason for it. And so what could that reasoning be? There's an immune response to the food. Now, there are things like gluten and dairy that we have epigenetic variants that can predispose us to being sensitive to gluten and dairy. A lot of us don't have the enzymes any longer to break down dairy, so it creates a problem for us. And then there are some other things that can be problematic for us as well. But I think in a lot of cases what we're looking at is we have multiple food sensitivities because of an immune response. So what is it that's creating the immune response? The food sensitivity might be making the response worse, but there's something else deeper that's creating this inflammatory response that then is having the immune system react to the foods that you're eating. And which is why a lot of people say, okay, I'm sensitive to this food, let's do food sensitivity testing, when really what we need to look at, are there toxicants that your body's unable to detoxify and is creating a burden for your body, creating an immune response, right? Is there infection? I see this all the time. Infection is going to create an immune response, which is going to create an inflammatory response, which is going to upregulate the immune system, which then, has the potential of leading to, okay, now I'm sensitive to all of these foods. If I were to do a food sensitivity test on everyone, especially those who are super chronic, in the beginning, and this has happened before, they come back to me super frustrated because their test results are lit up red. So, just like anything else, if we're looking, at the colors of these kinds of tests, right? So we have green, yellow, and red. So green is fine, yellow is moderate, red is a high sensitivity. And so if I were to start with doing food sensitivity testing without understanding what could be making the immune system angry in the first place, then people get really, really frustrated because they're like, I can't eat anything, what am I going to do? And it's not what it's about, because it's not about the food, it's about whatever's creating the immune response. So we have to be really careful when we are, to me, as a practitioner and as practitioners, when I'm talking with practitioners, we have to be really careful with when and why and how we do these food sensitivity tests. I have a client right now, interestingly, I just thought about this, who back several years ago was starting to struggle with some symptoms, went to see someone, whoever it was, a practitioner, and that was one of the first tests they did, is they did food sensitivity tests. And so what she ended up doing, what she's been doing over the last several years now, is avoiding these foods. And her comment to me was that she feels like she's starting to develop a really unhealthy relationship with food because of this food sensitivity test. And so I had to tell her, this isn't okay. We don't, and it's been several years ago. The body's super dynamic. As she's been avoiding all of these foods, is she still sensitive to them? Probably not. And if she is, it's probably because all the other things that she's dealing with that are creating the sensitivities. So there's definitely a place for understanding the food sensitivity. So if there is, if it is creating more of an immune response, you know, we can take those foods out and we can kind of take the, you know, start to lighten the load on the immune system as we're working toward helping it deal with whatever's going on that's creating the problem in the first place. But for her to feel like she can't eat normal food and has started to develop this unhealthy relationship with food, this is not okay. And this is not what any practitioner wants. Nobody wants to be the one that says, hey, here's your testing and now we're going to start to make things a little bit worse for you. It should be, we might have to avoid some things for a while, but then let's follow up and let's work on making sure that everything is in balance, including the mental and the emotional and the mindset, right? We don't want to, because someone doesn't feel well physically, then for it to take them further down mentally and emotionally and then create this unhealthy mindset. So those are things that we need to really pay attention to. And anybody who is out there who's thinking about food sensitivity testing, it's a great idea. I mean, we'll dig into it a little bit. It gives us a lot of great information, but we have to have other information as well. It is usually second, depending on budget and that kind of thing, it's usually second in line for me. If someone has a budget and they want to do as much testing as possible, I will certainly do food sensitivity testing as top line. But it's going to usually be, you know, a test. If we're not making the progress that I think we need to make within a few months, then we start looking at, okay, what do we need to do to continue easing the burden on the body? Let's look at food sensitivity testing. What's interesting too, though, that can be really beneficial with food sensitivity testing, and so I don't know if I said this already, I think I did, but I love food sensitivity testing. It's a great thing that can give us a lot of information. It's just we want to be careful about how we do it and when we do it. But there's some things that we can find that maybe we might not know. And so what can happen is with certain foods is they can actually start to create an antibody response. So there's a component in milk. And so I have a client of mine excuse me, who she knew she was sensitive to a lot of things, and she's sensitive to a lot of the basic things, right? So we have our top 5 most sensitivity, most immune causing foods, which are soy, wheat or gluten, dairy, eggs, and corn. And so, and I think she's sensitive to all of those things. But what's interesting is she was still, at the time, she was still doing some dairy products. When we got her food sensitivity test back, there's one company who will test for a component of milk called butyrophilin. Butyrophilin is in all types of milk, right? It doesn't matter if it's camel or if it's goat, it's in all types of milk. And if you're sensitive and it shows up, if butyrophilin shows up, what it does then is it creates an antibody response against brain tissue. So this is one of those situations, this is the only time I've ever seen it, but where she was doing some dairy, we found this out, she stopped doing the dairy, and we saved her brain from excessive damage, right? What would have happened? I don't know. But she certainly avoids it now, and I think those are things that can be really important. When we're looking at even gluten sensitivity, there are different types of antibody responses. It can be to the skin, it can be to the GI, it can be to the brain, I believe. And so we can look at these things and we can understand, if we're digging deep enough, if we're going to the deeper testing, we can understand what is it that this sensitivity is actually impacting, and will over time, if we keep eating it, will continue to create damage. So anyway, beyond that one, there's also a myth, which is interesting to me, that only children have food sensitivities. This is absolutely not true. that lots of us can have sensitivities. Another thing that sensitivities can create over time is weight gain, right? So if we have an inflammatory response to certain foods, particularly those like gluten and dairy, and we're unable to lose weight, is it partly because we keep eating these things that our body is telling us, hey, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. Here's something, again, another story that I just thought of. I don't know if it's a sensitivity, but if you've heard of the term lectins and phytates, these are anti-nutrients that are in certain foods like nightshades, which are tomatoes, and peppers, and eggplants, and potatoes, and that kind of thing. But there are also lectins in things like cashews, and I believe pumpkin seeds. And so these are things that we can test for if there's a sensitivity to these things. I've not tested myself, but something that I did is I decided I wanted to make my own cashew milk. So I will put a dairy alternative in my coffee, and I was doing this every day for a month. I put on 5 or 6 or 7 pounds in a month, and I was like, whoa, what is that about? And so I cut the cashew milk back out. I soaked it. I did the whole thing, and the weight just came right back off. So was that an inflammatory response? Was that, hey, my body is not really happy with, is it the cashew itself? Is it the lectins in the cashews? What is it? I don't know. But it was super interesting and fascinating to learn these things about myself. That's so much of what life is about is learning and educating and understanding. And I'm my own best guinea pig, so it's fun to see these things, but it's not fun to put on that kind of weight so fast. It's not great. But anyway, now I know. So I have changed that, and the cashews now go to my husband. All right, so let's see. I think let's talk a little bit about those 5 things that can be the most problematic for people. And like I said, it's eggs, gluten, dairy, corn, and soy. A couple of things that we need to know. Corn and soy in particular are problematic because they're so high in pesticides and herbicides. They're both genetically modified. So the body doesn't like them, doesn't recognize them in a lot of cases, and can be really problematic. Soy itself has it has in it what's called a trypsin inhibitor, which doesn't allow for the breakdown of protein. So if you are eating your edamame with your sushi, you're potentially not breaking down the protein that's in your sushi, the fish, right? So it's not beneficial for us to eat large amounts of soy. I eat very little soy. If I do, it's tamari. What's the difference between soy sauce and tamari? Soy sauce has gluten in it. It is fermented, but it's got gluten in it. Tamari is a soy sauce, but it does not have gluten in it. It's a deeper, richer flavor as far as I'm concerned, so I think it's better. But I don't do a lot of soy. My preference at home is coconut aminos. They're delicious. They're just a little bit sweet, a little bit sweeter than regular soy sauce or tamari, but it's really, really delicious. And it's coconut. So, there are those who have sensitivities to coconut as well, but I think most people don't. So, really good alternative there. But certainly there are other things that can create food sensitivities as well. But if you are in a situation where you need to start to understand your situation, or you need to start to understand what's going on with your body, you don't have a practitioner yet, whatever it might be, those are the top 5 things that I tell people to cut out, is cut out those 5 things and see what happens. One of my favorite stories is a young client I had who was really, really struggling mentally, emotionally, physically. She could not put on weight. She was breaking out. She was sad. She was anxious. She was depressed. It was all of these things. And so what we did was, of course, we were running labs, but in the meantime, we cut out those 5 foods. She was in Mexico. And so it can be a difficult thing when, so much of your normal diet, it contains corn, contains wheat, and contains cheese, dairy, right? So it's just kind of part of it. But she cut all of those things out, those top 5. And within this 2-week period, while we're waiting on her test results, her everything about her started to change. Huge changes in her face stopped breaking out. She was happier. The depression, the anxiety went away. All of these things within 2 weeks. And her mom was like, oh my gosh, I have my daughter back. But this is the beautiful thing about food, and the hard thing about food, but how fascinating it is that something that we think is so benign can play such a role in dysfunction. And so, you know, the best part about her as well is when we got her genetics back, she was prone to autoimmune disease and celiac disease. She didn't have it yet, but had she not stopped eating gluten, she could have been in for a lifetime of autoimmune disease, right? So it's amazing to know what our potential is and how to mitigate that. A lot of people tend to be afraid of doing genetics, and it's more epigenetics. So epigenetics, locations that sit essentially on top of genes, but they control gene expression. So our epigenetics are controlled by lifestyle, by food, by stress, by trauma, by exercise, by relationships, by all of these things that are in our lifestyle. This is what controls our epigenome, which then controls gene expression. So we had the ability through our lifestyle, through the food that we eat and don't eat, to control the expression of things like autoimmune disease. And so with this client, that's what we did. And hopefully are continuing to do with the more that she knows, because she's now a nutritionist, which is awesome. But, you know, having that knowledge about your genetic or epigenetic potential allows for you to make the modifications in diet and in lifestyle that help you to mitigate those risk factors. And so we can look at these genes for cardiovascular risk factors. I do this more and more now. We can look at genes for Alzheimer's. There's one in particular. We can look at these genes for even things like long COVID. So we can look and have have this amazing amount of information that gives us the tools to live our life on a daily basis, understanding what our body needs and what it doesn't need. It's really, really, it's awesome. It really is. And so what I don't want are for people to be afraid of understanding, of learning their genetics, because it really is a super powerful tool. I will say too that there are people who just don't want to know, but they want to be guided. And so what you can do if you just want to have the knowledge on how to best utilize diet and lifestyle to your benefit, but you don't really want to know the risk. I kind of get it. I like having the power of knowing, but if you don't want to know the risk, then have your practitioner do the testing, and then that practitioner can tell you what to do, but you don't have to know the risks that you're dealing with. That's fine too. I get that. So it's still just such a really, really powerful tool. Okay, so let's see. Another thing that maybe we should hit on a little bit is gut health. You know, when we're talking about, you know, going back to what are the causes of food sensitivities, could it be, you know, we want to understand that in most cases that the reason for the sensitivities is something deeper than just the food itself. So if you're dealing with a situation where your gut's not as healthy as it could be, and we don't always know that, right? Just because our gut is not in a good place doesn't mean we're going to have gut symptoms, doesn't mean we're going to have pain and bloating and all the things that can go along with it. Although we might, but we might not. So doing testing to look at your GI, understanding the potential for infection, if there's infection there, if there is dysbiosis being an imbalance of the good bugs and the bad bugs. And so that dysbiosis can create a situation where the body is not able to handle the immune response. So our gut microbiome is 70% of our immune system. It also is 90% of our serotonin production, which is our happy neurotransmitter. So if our gut's not in a good place, it has the potential of affecting us physically, mentally, emotionally, right? So keeping that in check is really important. So if we have bugs that are whether they're opportunistic bugs or pathogenic bugs. So opportunistic being bugs that are supposed to be there, but we don't have enough good bugs to keep them under control, so they opportunistically proliferate and create pathogenic issues. Then we have bugs that are just pathogenic, that shouldn't be there at all. So understanding what it is and what our microbiome looks like, so then we have the knowledge to start to balance that out. So if we balance our microbiome, are we then better able to handle the foods that we're taking in and that we're eating, so we don't have the sensitivities? I think, yeah, certainly that can play a big role in our health, without a doubt. So that's one of the tests that I do really on a regular basis. With 99.5% of my client base has a GI test, so we can understand what's going on there. I'll tell you the two tests that I do that I think are some of the best tests for really getting a lot of good information is going to be a GI panel and then what's called a total tox. Total tox looks at mycotoxin exposures. It looks like at environmental toxins. It looks at heavy metals. And so all of those things have the potential of creating food sensitivities, has the potential of creating pain, fatigue, brain fog. I mean, the list goes on, because it's putting a burden on the body. I will say one thing, just sort of a side note on that though, because a lot of people want to do heavy metal testing, and heavy metal testing is great. There's no really good test for heavy metal testing. It's unfortunate. We can get some good guidance from some of the testing that we can do, but because heavy metals are detoxified via skin, hair, urine, stool, blood, sweat, all of these different ways that the heavy metals are detoxified, that it's hard for us to really understand what that burden is. And so something like mercury. Mercury is hair, blood, and urine are the ways that it is excreted. And so to best understand mercury toxicity, and there's organic and inorganic mercury, which we can also test for. But knowing what your exposure is, the only test that I know of, at least at this point, is what's called a mercury tri-test. And so having a true understanding of your mercury exposure toxicity, if it's organic or inorganic, is through this one test. And so, it can, these things can add up, and I'm fully aware of that. So, if we see that there is mercury exposure, then maybe that's when we go and do a mercury tri-test. But we want to be fully aware of what kind of data, what kind of information that we can get from these tests. My goal always is to get as much information as I can for a little, for the most bang for our buck is really what it's about. So if we're doing a total toxin, if we're doing a food sensitivity, if we're doing a GI panel, we're going to get a ton of information there that is going to help us determine either what testing needs to come next, if that's food sensitivity testing that needs to come next, or what comes next, or can we just start moving forward with a protocol, right? So I think that it is about understanding, at least to the best of our ability, what's causing what is, again, it's root cause, right? We want to dig for the root cause first and foremost and address those first and foremost, because we want the body to be able to do what it's supposed to do on its own. We don't want to have to support it all the time. We want to support it, but we don't want to have to always take supplements and always have to be worried about the sensitivities and always have to do all of these things, because the body is there to protect us. The body, we shouldn't feel like we're fighting it all the time, when sometimes we feel like we are. But it really is understanding what it's trying to tell us, and so often we can do that through testing. It really is key. So let's see. Other things that can play a role, that are just inflammation and inflammatory things that can cause inflammation is sugar and unhealthy fats. So if we are, and then of course this inflammation is what leads to food sensitivities, which is why I'm bringing it up in the first place. But it's the sugar that we're eating on a daily basis. It's the sugar that we're getting in our processed foods. Even if it's not a sugary food, they add sugar to everything, right? If you go get a yogurt, they take out the fat, you put in sugar. Now, I'm not a big fan of a lot of yogurts, most yogurts, but they add in sugar for the flavor, especially when they take out fat. And fat, a whole other topic, but fat is necessary. It's necessary for our cellular integrity, for our brain function, for hormone function. We've got to have good, healthy fat. So don't be afraid of fat, but you've got to eat the right fat, right? So there are also the fake sweeteners that are out there that can be really problematic and inflammatory. And on top of that, they slow down your metabolism, which are gonna, it's gonna make you put on weight. So we think we're doing these 0-calorie sodas and things like that, and what we're doing is creating more inflammation and more metabolic issues by drinking these even once a week, right? If we do more, if we're drinking them more than that, even it's a problem. So once a day is not okay. I'll have clients tell me that pretty regularly. I only have a soda a day. That's inflammatory and will cause a problem, and certainly will increase glucose levels. So other things that are going to cause inflammation that can lead to food sensitivities is stress, right? Stress is a huge problem in our society. We have stress from our financial situations, from our jobs, from our relationships. We have stress from food, from disease states. We have stress from all of these different things, and it just ends up in this sort of this downward spiral, because once you have stress, then you have inflammation, then you have disease, which causes more stress, more inflammation, more disease, and it just goes round and round, and it just is a really nasty cycle. So it always sounds so simple, but it really can make a huge impact if you're just taking that little bit of time on a daily basis to sit, to be still, to meditate, to pray, to read your Bible, to whatever it is that you do to be still. Even if so I had a client who she would always say, well, I have to go sit in the shower. She had kids. So if it's going and sitting and being still in the shower for 5 minutes, or taking a bath, whatever it is for you that stops you, slows you down, stops the mind going, that's what you need to do. Go outside, walk in the grass, go pet your dogs, right? These are things that will really kind of bring you out of that sympathetic stress, fight or flight state. And mindful eating. If you're eating too fast and you're not breaking down your food, you're not utilizing your nutrients, that's going to create stress because you're nutrient deficient. So, let's not eat in front of the computer. I have to focus on that sometimes because sometimes I do. So if it's warm outside, I go outside and I eat, and I watch the dogs, and I play with the dogs, and I hang out. So, being mindful of your food, smelling your food, chewing slowly, and appreciating where it came from and the fact that you have it. These are all great ways of slowing down the stress response and moving out of the stress response and into what's called the parasympathetic, or the rest and digest. So so much of the blood, when we're in the sympathetic or that fight or flight or that high stress, the blood goes from the core to the extremities, because it's like you got to run, right? It's just how we're built. It's how we're made. And so if we move that into that calm, relaxed, rest and digest, then the blood goes to the core, so it works, right? It's working on your core and in your core. So as you're eating, it's allowing your GI to work properly. It's allowing for your hydrochloric acid to be produced properly, for your digestive enzymes to be produced properly, so you're breaking down your food and then you're able to utilize it. So it is so much about utilizing the food that you're taking in, because if you're just scarfing it down, you're probably not breaking it down, and it's just coming out the other end, right? And so that's not something that we want either. Okay, so let's see. I wanted to talk a little bit more, I think, about food reactivity and food sensitivity testing, because there are a few different things to know about food sensitivity testing that can be beneficial for you, or for anybody. But so often we can do what is just a really big food sensitivity test. And so it can look at, say 200, 250 different foods, and it's telling you if you're having some kind of immune response to that food. And in understanding that, it can be helpful. And yeah, do we need to do an elimination diet? Do we need to get rid of everything that's yellow and red? Or is it too much? Do we want to get rid of the red stuff? So it's really a call based on the client's needs and what's going on with the client. But again, making sure, in case you're just joining us, knowing and understanding that we still want to understand what else is going on that could be causing the sensitivities in the first place. But what it doesn't do is really dig into how some of these foods are impacting us. And so talking about gluten specifically has the ability to do a couple of things. It can, and we hit on this a few minutes ago, but it can impact our GI, it can impact our skin, it can impact our brain. It also, what can happen is there can be what's called cross-reactivity or molecular mimicry. And so there are a couple of reasons for this. If we're not breaking down our food properly, we have these amino acid chains, right? These amino acid chains are what the body recognizes, or what the body kind of is scoping out. And so it recognizes things by the amino acid structure. And so if we are not breaking down food properly and pulling these amino acids apart, then these amino acids can start to look like each other. So we call that molecular mimicry. And so if we're looking at something like gluten, now gluten is a very broad term, because there are lots of things that we can be sensitive to that are in the wheat grain, or in the grain, even other grains, that may not be gluten itself, right? There's gliadin, and I don't even know them all. There are probably hundreds of them. And we can be sensitive to those, but be fine with gluten. And that's the hard part, because, if we're doing these really general labs, general gluten sensitivity testing, so say my GI panel that I run, it will do an anti-gliadin panel. And if it comes back that it doesn't show a sensitivity to it, they're like, oh, I'm fine with gluten. But that's likely not true, because it's very general. It's not really digging in and giving us all of the information. Now, if we're just going to stop eating gluten altogether, then there's no point in doing some of these testing. But if you really want to learn and understand what you're sensitive to, and what part of the wheat you're sensitive to, and how you're reacting and why you're reacting, these are things that can be really important in helping to guide you in what it is that how you move forward in your daily plans for eating. And I love having this information. It's really great to know what my body is reacting to or not reacting to. But it's not always necessary if we're just going to stop eating gluten altogether. But what can happen too with this molecular mimicry or this cross-reactivity is, say we find out you're sensitive to whatever component of gluten there is, but you're still having symptoms. So there are these cross-reactive foods that you could still be eating that the body says, oh, you're still eating gluten. So that's a problem. And it will react to it like it's gluten because of this molecular mimicry, right? And so there are things super interesting. I've got my little list here. But there are obviously other gluten-containing grains besides wheat. So rye, barley, spelt, Polish wheat. But instant coffee is another one that can be problematic for people, and the body sees it as gluten. So then the gliadin cross-reactive foods would be cow's milk, alpha casein and beta casein. There's casomorphin. So casomorphin is a component of milk that actually hits the morphine receptor sites in the brain. So fascinating stuff, because when I hear people tell me I can't not have my cheese, it's because of that casomorphin that's binding to that morphine receptor site and makes you say, this is what I have to have, right? Super fascinating stuff. There's also gluteomorphin. So it is a component in wheat that hits that morphine receptor site that can be problematic. It makes you say, I have to have my pasta. I have to have my bread, right? So other things, the milk butyrophilin that I was talking about, whey protein, milk chocolate, yeast, oats, millet, rice, corn, let's see, buckwheat, sorghum, hemp, sesame, amaranth, quinoa, tapioca, teff, potato, and then, yeah, other ones, of course, would be egg white, egg yolk, and soy. So these are all things that you could be eating that the body still just thinks is gluten, and you're still reacting to it. So it's fascinating to run a panel like this so you know what are the things that you need to stay away from that could be causing a problem for you. And it could be, it could be sometimes as simple as taking digestive enzymes. If your GI is not functioning properly, you've got some pancreatic insufficiency, you might want to take some good hydrochloric acid and some digestive enzymes. Those help break apart those amino acids, or those amino acid chains, so the body doesn't start doing that cross-reactive, hey, I think that you're gluten thing. So we really want our GI to be fully intact and all of our organ systems be working properly, so we're breaking down the food the way that we should, and we're utilizing the nutrients within. You've probably heard me say this a million times, but if you're new to the show, what's one of my favorite things is and it was a game changer in my world of nutrition, but the fact that food is a language. Food is is how our body knows what to do. It's the nutrients within that tells our body, okay, this is what I need to do, and this is how I need to go do it. If we're not eating good, healthy food, then our body becomes confused. If we're not breaking down our food properly and utilizing it properly, and we are nutrient deficient, or we're creating this situation of cross-reactivity, then our body's going to become confused. And it's this, you're starting to, it's a, sort of this chicken or the egg is how it feels, but it's these basic things that sometimes we just need to understand, often through lab testing, what we need to do to for these just like super basic things to help the body to move forward and out of this situation that it's in. One of the things that you can do to help your GI is apple cider vinegar, raw apple cider vinegar with the mother. It's called the mother. So if you'll see a haziness down at the bottom, that's the bacteria, and that bacteria is beneficial bacteria. So it can help to build your hydrochloric acid. It can help to support your GI. So periodically I'll shoot it in water. You can do it morning, you can do it evening. Some people will say it helps with their weight management, right? So it's a good probiotic food that can help build your GI. Couple of things with that, or your GI health, sorry. But if you are, say you drink it and it burns too much, because it will burn, but that's why you mix it with water. But if it burns too much, you might have eroded away some of this this epithelial lining, and that can be problematic too. So you just being aware of that. So you might want to support that epithelial lining throughout. So it's kind of a symptom, right? If your GI is not in a good spot, that's a symptom. Also, a lot of people are afraid of it because they're afraid that it's going to increase their heartburn. And what heartburn typically is a lack of hydrochloric acid, not too much of it. And so, we find that it's super problematic for a lot of people who are on constant PPIs, constant, acid blockers in Tums and things like that, because they're blocking that acid that's there and it's beneficial and we need it to break down and utilize our nutrients. So this can be another reason why we have food sensitivities, because we don't have enough hydrochloric acid, because we're using these acid blockers that don't allow us to break down our food. Then beyond that, it doesn't allow us to absorb our nutrients, so we can become deficient in minerals. So you've heard of osteoporosis and osteopenia. It's rampant. And so is that in part or a lot due to these acid blockers that are used for a continued period of time that shouldn't be used, because we're told that we have too much acid, so we need to block it. So this really should be a whole other topic in and of itself, because it creates a situation of dysbiosis. It creates a situation of nutrient deficiency, leading to all kinds of chronic situations that maybe could have been avoided in the first place. So if this is where you are and you've been taking these acid blockers for more than 2 weeks, because that's what they're indicated for, is for 2 weeks, then consider that something needs to be done about them. You can't, more times than not, you can't just come off of them cold turkey. It'll really be uncomfortable. So you've got to work with someone who can help you come off of them. But consider that and find somebody who can help you, because they are excessively damaging. It's really important to make sure that you're not creating more damage. It's pretty important stuff, right? So let's see, what else? It's really kind of the big stuff I wanted to talk about. I have this pretty little graphic here that's interesting to me, because one of the things that it shows when it comes to wheat proteins, going back to wheat itself and the different things that we can be sensitive to. Let's see, put my glasses on. So there are gluten proteins, but then there are the opioids. Remember we talked about the opioids. So there's gluteomorphin and prodinomorphin. Then we've got non-gluten peptides that we can also have sensitivity to. We've got lectins. Remember we talked about lectins a little while ago, that lectins can be problematic for some people and we can be sensitive to them. There's wheat germ agglutinin that we can be sensitive to. So I'm going to show you this. I should probably post this somewhere. But these are just a small percentage of all of the different things that we could be sensitive to when it comes to gluten. And so really understanding what that means for you specifically is important to helping you to do your best to eliminate the things that are not beneficial for you and bring in the things that are beneficial for you. So with that being said, I'm going to just segue a little bit into soulful conception, which you'll obviously see behind me, because I see a lot of, especially my women clients, that's who I see mostly, although I do see men as well, but my women clients who come to me who are struggling with, could it be food sensitivities, but why? And they have these symptoms and these conditions and this autoimmune stuff that may be going on, but they also want to get pregnant. And so that was what really has led me into putting together this program called Soulful Conception, which is planning for pregnancy. It's not pregnancy. It's not post-delivery. This is all of that time prior to getting pregnant. It's optimizing the body prior to getting pregnant. It's doing everything that we can to ensure that the eggs that we're producing are good, healthy eggs, which takes about 4 months, right? So it's about 4 months to make sure you're producing good, healthy eggs. And then making sure that hormones are in place, that any kind of antibody activity is hopefully been brought down, is at bay. So we're doing all of these things that are supportive to conception itself. And then of course supportive to carrying a child, and then of course supportive to creating health for hundreds of years ahead, which is the most beautiful thing and the most fascinating thing about all of this, is the ability that we have as individuals to create the health of the future. So it is in our so much in our control to take the steps to create our own health, and then to create the health of our kiddos and our great grandkids, however many greats that is. One day I'll figure that out. So it's having these labs, whatever labs that you can have done, so you have the ability to look at markers that could be problematic for you and for conception, and getting those in line, making sure that those are in a good spot for you. So, let's do everything that we can to mitigate the struggle. We have so many who are struggling today to get pregnant, whether it's, female fertility, male fertility. Male fertility's in the tank. I'm telling you, it's crazy. And so addressing health can mitigate the frustration and the sadness of having the struggles of getting pregnant. And hopefully it will mitigate having to go through these fertility procedures. They're so expensive, and nothing's guaranteed, right? So if we can get you as healthy as possible prior to conception, even if you then do have to go through fertility treatments, at least you're in a good spot to be able to go through it, instead of feeling like crap and still struggling. It's my goal. I just want to stop the struggle as much as possible and create healthy, happy families. That's really what it's all about. So that's kind of where we are. You can find me at tastelifenutrition.com. You can find me, all of the social media is Taste Life Nutrition. I am happy to chat with you about whatever might be going on with you. So if I can help, great. If I know people who can help, that's great too. My goal is to be a resource. I want to be there to help people to learn, to optimize, to educate, to give, to love, all of the things that we're all put here to do. So you can go to the website and fill out a free analysis. It's an assessment, so it's a short assessment. It's during my intake that you do the full analysis, but this is a short assessment that gives me sort of an overall view of what's going on in your body. So that's the stuff that we chat about, and if I can help you, then that's what we chat about as well. And if I need to send you on to someone who's better than I am at whatever it is, then that's what we're going to do as well. So I just want for people to be the best that they can be, and that's really what I'm here for. So let me know if you have questions. Let me know if there's anything that I can do. If you have ideas on things that you want me to talk about, obviously usually we have a guest on here. Sometimes it's just me, but it's fun for me to kind of get outside of my box a little bit and chat about some of the things that I think are important to talk about, that we don't always get to talk about. So I hope you all have a wonderful Thursday. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week, streaming live here on KUHSdenver.com on the Taste Life Nutrition Radio and Podcast. See you later.